to give you a little bit of context, so this is our activity session, and for those of you who were in the lecture last Thursday, you remember we talked about theory, we talked about what's economics and a little bit about resources and things like that. And we're not going to do that at all here. Instead, we're just going to focus on solving problems. So, but I will give you a little bit of a heads up, and I did this at the lecture last time. Don't discount the conceptual things that we discuss in lecture, because they can show up on the final too. And a lot of them are sort of, I would say conceptual / definitional, but they're really important because at the end of the day, being applied mathematicians, it's our job to interpret what the math means, just like it is for an electrical engineer or somebody in physics, right? They might do some gravitational equation calculation, but basically at the end of the day, they're going to say, well, this means if you don't build the bridge with this support, it's going to collapse. And so we have to be able to tell people things like that. And so the conceptual pieces help us interpret what the math mean, but the math is just math at the end of the day, and it's the exact same math that you guys are used to and that they use in other disciplines. In fact, just as an aside, I'll tell you guys a story about an acquaintance of mine who had a PhD in solid state physics, and we were hanging out one time and he saw me doing some of the math stuff that I was doing for one of my research papers, and he said, well, what do you have to know that for? Because it turns out it's exactly the same types of equations that he was using in physics. So to describe, the behavior of projectiles and things like that. So yeah, it's the interpretation is what ends up making us different and making us especially valuable. And so you guys want to pay attention to that stuff. It's pretty straightforward, but if you miss it, then you'll be missing something important. So I went over to this screen, and so now can you guys see the Ignithium problem set? Yeah or no?
No.
No.
No. Okay, you guys can't. Okay. So let me make sure, because like on my video, if I switch screens like that, so let me do a new share, and so now you guys can see it, I guess. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So also you guys probably want to note that I sent out a message and I put some example problem sets up, just again to give people context. The ultimately our materials for this class are going to entail using the Ignithium website, and so you guys have to go and do that. But we're still in the add drop period, and if you guys haven't made your final decision yet, then looking at the problem sets and seeing kind of like what you're in for, at least at the beginning, should provide a little bit of help for trying to make that decision. The other thing is that I also put in my email that though it's not required, it's really helpful that you've had calculus before you take this class. There'll be a couple of demonstrations that we do a little bit later once we get past this first section of the class, and that are about important material. And if you haven't had calculus, you can still do it, but there'll be these formulas that if you've had calculus will make a lot of sense and be pretty straightforward. And if you haven't had calculus, you just have to memorize them. So, you know, if you haven't had calculus, then you know, there's some material that's going to be, and I'll explain it as we go along, and I'll explain the intuition. It's not very difficult. It's, you know, I would say basic calculus, but it's necessary. So if you haven't had it, something else you want to take into consideration. So okay, this beginning section is just, you know, a little bit of a math review, and so obviously the first couple of questions are just, you know, general calculation type stuff. But actually, so we get down to question number 4, and this is one of the things that like a lot of people, and actually let me do a different one because okay, this is a better one. Okay. Um, so a lot of people don't understand that when we look at graphs in economics, um, we're often interested in their intersection points of different lines in the graph. So you guys are probably, well, I'm sure you're all familiar with competitive equilibrium where demand meets supply. That's a simple simultaneous equation problem, and we're interested in the intersection of those. And then you probably also realize that when we have those graphs intersecting, then we end up with you know, a couple of triangles, and we can interpret those triangles. But also, a lot of times you end up with trapezoids. So I'll give you guys a little illustration, and I'll do my other share back on the whiteboard. And okay. Okay, it's being silly with me. Switch me back and forth between them. Okay. 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 So can you guys see the whiteboard now? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good. Okay. And okay. So, okay, so here we see demand and supply curve intersecting, just two lines intersecting in the positive quadrant of the Cartesian plane. So, well, obviously, again, if we look at the graph as it is, we can see that there are a couple of triangles, depending upon how we want to look at it. But a lot of times, what we're interested in is slices of pieces of the triangles. So let's see if we can do a good job here of okay. So hopefully you guys can see all the area here that I'm paying attention to with the spotlight. And so that's the context in which this type of question number 4 becomes relevant. And you know, a lot of people fight the techniques, and that's fine. You know, I mean, the beauty of math is that there are lots of different ways to get an answer to a problem. As long as you obey the rules of math, you know, you can do it your own way. It's one of the things I like about math. A lot of people think math is very strict in one way it is, but another way gives you a lot of freedom. And you know, as a student when I was younger, I liked doing things my own way. But normally, when people are suggesting something, they're doing it because they've tried the other ways, and the way that they're suggesting is the easy way. So, you know, in my case, I would tell you guys that, you know, I'm telling you guys this because this is the easy way. So, question number 4 asks us, well, okay, we have these two bases. Now, obviously, this is a really sharp, you know, example where one base is really big and the other base is really small, and we have a height of 9. But there's a formula, which is you take the average of the bases times the height to calculate the area of the trapezoid. So, you know, in this case, since we have 177 and 2 and 9, then I'll go ahead and see if we can go back to the whiteboard the way that we wanted to. Okay. And so here, it keeps switching me back and forth. So maybe. Okay. So the trapezoidal area, and this works for the type of trapezoid you see here, or if you guys are familiar with the term of a right trapezoid, that's a trapezoid where one of the sides is like a square. So the formula is the average of the bases times the height. And in our example, that would be the trapezoid's area is 177 plus 2 divided by 2. times our height, which was 9. So I'll let you guys tell me what the answer should be. You guys, normally for this session, it's useful to have a calculator. So if you think you know the answer, raise your hand. Okay. So I have another song that I sing sometimes for my students, which is, if you don't know the answer, raise your hand. If you don't know the answer, raise your hand. If you really don't know it and you need some help to show it, if you don't know the answer, raise your hand. So since nobody's raised their hand, it means I can call on anybody, right? So you're like, how do I raise my hand? So, okay. So Derek Tafoya, you're at the top of my list. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Derek, hit us up. You didn't raise your hand. What's the answer?
805.5.
Okay, so you'd say 805.5. All right. So let's go ahead and check it out. Okay, number 4. Is that what you got?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So then we go, yay, Derek. Good job. Okay. So does anybody have any questions? Probably not. That's good. All right. So let's go ahead and we'll skip down to something maybe a little bit more interesting because we're interested in areas this morning. So let's take a look at number 11. So it says, what's the area under the curve for this line, which is 177 plus 2 times x from 0 to 9? That's a good question. Well, I'll tell you guys what. I'm going to give you guys, let's say, 5 minutes. Maybe not 5 minutes. 3 minutes. So you guys, you should go ahead and you should graph out the line and you should calculate your answer, and then I'll come back to you and we'll talk about it. Does anybody have any questions for me before? Because I won't just, if you're like, I don't even know how to get started, I'm, something like that, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself. Okay. So question number 11. So is everybody good? Okay. Ernie, are you there? Ernie Hermosillo? Ernie? Okay. Okay, I don't hear Ernie. Let's see. So I'm in the chat right now. Are you there this morning, Ernie? I have you in chat, Ernie. Okay. Okay. What about you, Mauricio? Okay. Are you okay? Do you have any questions, Mauricio? Ah, okay. See what I'm talking about? So,
Hi, Professor.
hi. Who do I have?
Sarah here.
Okay, Sarah.
Uh, I actually I don't know how to start it. Are we gonna using the integral?
Well, see, okay. I'll tell you what, and this is like a really, really, really good question. Okay. So there are easy ways and more, let's call them mathematically sophisticated ways to approach these problems. It is true that if you did calculate the integral and
Mm-hmm.
you were careful, you'd get the right answer. I say you'd be careful because, once you do the antiderivative, you have the constant, and the constant could be anything. You have to know from the context of the problem what the constant is. So I've had a lot of students in the past that were a little bit more mathematically sophisticated, and they went ahead and they just used the integral, but they got the constant wrong, so their answer was way off. But if you think about it, the reason why the integral works is because the integral describes the area underneath a curve, right? So a function, a general function. But you don't have to do the heavy lifting here because it's just a linear function.
Yeah.
So since the function's linear, you can just graph it like I did when I was on the whiteboard,
Mm-hmm.
and you can just look at the area, and the area is going to be a geometric shape. And then you can look at the dimensions of that geometric shape, and you can go ahead and calculate the area. So that's what I do, and I would recommend that you do, because it's just easier, and it's harder to make mistakes that way. So yeah, when we're doing these early morning sessions where we're just focusing in on the math, for the activity, what I recommend you guys do is go ahead and graph out the equations, have a piece of paper, graph out the equations, and then go ahead and look at what you've got on the graph. And normally it'll be some geometric shape, and then you calculate the area, and then you'll be good. So is that all right, Sarah? Do you think you know how to get started now?
Yeah, I will try.
Yeah, okay. So I'll give you guys 3 minutes. And I would say to everybody in the chat right now, I'm gonna leave the chat active, but don't put up answers in the chat until we get to the part where we're gonna reveal the answer, because either there'll be some people that look and immediately agree with you and think that you're right, and they won't try to do it on their own, right? Or they'll think they know how to do it, or um, you know, um, you'll be wrong, and they won't know that you're wrong, and maybe it'll be revealed later. But whether you're right or wrong isn't really the point. The point is to get everybody to practice and to kind of do it together. So we're all learning together. Um, so I'm sure there's some of you guys that already know the answers or figured it out, and that's good. But just hold your horses for 3 minutes. Okay, see you guys in a minute. Okay. So, would anybody like to volunteer to talk about the problem now? Okay. So, how about Emily Cobian? How are you doing? Are you there, Emily?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So how did you do with number 11?
Good.
Good. Okay. So you want to tell us what your answer was and go ahead and put it in the chat box, just so we have a record. If other people don't hear it, they can see it.
Actually, okay, I think I did it wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. I was reading it right now and I was like, wait, no, I did something wrong. Never mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So before I let you go, I'll ask anybody else. So does anybody else want to talk about their solution?
I could.
Okay. Okay. So who's talking right now?
Sonica.
Okay. I didn't hear you. Can you speak up just a little bit?
Sorry, Sonica.
Sonica. Okay. So you want to tell me, you want to put your answer in the chat box and tell me what you did?
Sure. I'm not sure if it's right, but I
You
got
know, 1674?
yeah.
Okay, well, let's see if Ignatium agrees with you. Yay.
Yay, I get the same.
Yeah, okay. That's always positive.
Professor,
Yeah.
sorry. Could you show me how to
Yeah.
do your way? Because I'm still doing my way.
Yeah.
Because I tried to do it your way and it's wrong.
Yeah. Sure. No problem. So, so we have the equation is 177 plus 2x, right? And it's from 0 to 9. So let's go ahead and go back to the whiteboard. And hopefully the whiteboard is always giving me trouble this morning. I don't know why. Yep. Okay. So. Okay. So can you guys see the whiteboard?
Yes.
Okay, good. So here's our graph. Okay. So it's a positive sloping line like this. And okay. And so it goes from the origin to 9. Right. And let me try to just use the pointer to move it over a little bit. And okay. So does your graph look like that?
No, because I confused.
Yeah.
Which line?
Well, does it make sense why my graph looks like that?
How do you know if the slope positive? I'm sorry, I forgot about the math already.
Well, I guess you have to be a little bit more clear with me. How do I know which part? So
The slope, if it's positive or
yeah, because it says the equation was y is equal to 177 plus 2
Mhm.
times x. So see that there we have a positive slope coefficient,
Oh, okay.
right?
Yeah.
So, and then the thing that we're missing is we have a trapezoid, and we know the length of the first base, which I'm highlighting for you guys here. You see the little red dot? So that's 177. And
Yeah.
we know the height is 9. That's given on the horizontal axis. Okay. And then the only thing that we don't know is we don't know the length of this base. But because we know that the base's length is going to be given by the height of the function at 9, we can just put 9 into this equation and calculate the height at, and I'll try to put a little circle around it, the height. At that point up there. Okay, so so we would have y is equal to 177 plus 2 times 9, and then y is equal to 177 plus 18. And so 7 plus 8 is 15. So this is going to be y is equal to 195. If you guys see me make any calculation errors, stop me. So now we can use our trapezoid area formula, and maybe actually I'll do it a little bit lower here. And so we have one base is 177 plus the other base is 195. And we divide that by 2 to take the average of those two. And then we multiply by 9. And Sonica, is that what you did?
Yeah, I basically did that.
Okay. So does anybody have any questions about what I did or how I did it?
Now it's more clear. Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Thanks very much. So it's 8:23. We finished our morning practice session, and we'll continue on Thursday. And then I'll give you guys about 7 minutes. We'll start the main lecture at 8:30. And I'll see you guys in just a little bit. If anybody has any questions really quickly, they can ask it. No? Okay.
I do have a question, but does anybody having a problem with logging in the Zoom on your computer? Because last Thursday I had to miss the meeting because I couldn't join the meeting.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know this, but they sent out a message that Zoom was having trouble last Thursday and that they fixed it. So hopefully we're okay now. You know, I think that all of the Zoom infrastructure is being tested to the limit, given that it's COVID. so I don't.
Oh, I see.
You know, I mean, so I think, but you know, the thing is that we will struggle on. right? Kind of like regardless of you know, the difficulties we face as we move forward. If we start to have trouble with Zoom, then I'll just send out um, videos, and we'll figure something out. Anyway, okay, so I'll see you guys in just a few minutes. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
bye. Sure, bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I'm back. And so I'll say welcome to the main lecture. And does anybody have any quick questions before we get started? No. Okay. All right. So we'll start with a clean whiteboard. So okay. So when we got together last time, we just did this general introduction. We said we gave a definition of economics. Economics is the scientific study of resource allocation mechanisms. And that's our starting point. Okay. And let's see. And then I told you guys about the first fundamental welfare theorem. And I said the first fundamental welfare theorem tells us very simply, in the simplest way possible, that competitive markets are efficient. And hey, listen, I would recommend to everybody to memorize these things. You know, if you're considering a new tattoo this semester, then you know, it might be a good candidate. But there's a little bit deeper insight here. You know, if we think about the job of economists, there are really two things that economists do. And so job number one is to describe the equilibrium. Now, you can see from the first fundamental welfare theorem, that's the first thing that's done. It says, hey, it's a competitive equilibrium. But just note, and we'll introduce them in this class, and I'm sure you guys have heard of some of these. There are many different types of equilibria. So equilibria being plural for equilibrium, we don't say equilibriums generally. So for example, right, you have a competitive equilibrium, you have a monopoly equilibrium, you have oligopoly equilibria of different types. You have what we will call a Cournot equilibrium. There's a Bertrand equilibrium. And there's a Stackelberg equilibrium. You'll all learn about all of these things this semester. And, you know, there's also a general Nash equilibrium. So there are lots of different types of equilibrium, or equilibria, excuse me. And it's our job, again, to know based on the setting which type of equilibrium best describes it. Okay. So, and then the second part of the jobs is it says, well, markets are efficient, right? So I'll write it this way: characterize the welfare consequences of the equilibrium. Okay. So the operative term here is welfare, and when we're talking about welfare, we're talking about a quantitative description of, and I'll put this in quotes too, social well-being. Now, that makes economics unique in the social science disciplines. It's pretty ambitious and daring to not only describe and I would say controversial. It's pretty daring not only to describe what's going to happen in a particular trading environment. Remember, we're talking about resources being traded around the economy and what's going to happen. And in fact, I will tell you guys, if you're kind of like a little bit more interested in what happens when we describe the equilibrium, well, obviously, in a really simple setting, we're describing the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price. That's true. But there's more to it than that. And it just depends upon how deeply you want to look at what's going on in a particular setting or a particular economic model. But there are 3 questions or 3 points that are particularly appropriate, things that people are concerned about with respect to equilibrium. And they're often called 3 questions that every society has to answer with respect to resource allocation. So, and remember, in case you guys didn't make the first lecture or don't remember, that when we're talking about resource allocation, really we're talking about land. That's one big category of resources: labor and capital. And we talked a little bit about skilled labor, but more generally, economists refer to that as human capital, the knowledge, skills, and ability of workers. So, but the 3 questions are, and I'll just put a little star here. What to make, how to make it, and who is going to get it. So those are all allocation decisions. You allocate your resources, your land, your labor, and capital to different products and services. And then you have to decide for each product and service where you're allocating resources, really what are the techniques that are going to be used to turn the raw resources into the final products. And remember, the final products are resources too. We gave this this definition of resources as being, a resource is really anything with an opportunity cost. And we said, well, that really describes everything, with maybe the exception of general knowledge, basic ideas. Everything has an opportunity cost, it seems. So, but if you want to be concrete, you've got these resources. You might call them inputs. Sometimes we call them factors of production. And then you produce outputs. You could call those final products and services. And then you distribute the final products and services to different people in the economy to consume. And, in our economy, about a third of the final products and services end up being consumed by the government, meaning federal, state, and local governments, and about 2/3 of the goods and services end up being consumed by consumers. So that's how we do it with respect to this, who's going to get it. But there's even, a deeper layer to describing who's going to get what. And, you can get into issues of income inequality, wealth inequality, and, specific groups of people that are getting different amounts of goods and services. So you can dig as deep as you want to. But at the end of the day, economists have decided that our discipline will focus on quantitative descriptions of this process of allocating resources, such that we can really talk about two concepts under the heading of one. And so the main concept is what you would just call general economic efficiency. And general economic efficiency entails two pieces, which is productive efficiency and now you're going to think I'm using this term twice, but this is just the way it's referred to. Allocative efficiency. And allocative efficiency is sometimes called distributional efficiency. Okay. But the first part of this deals with this productive efficiency. And productive efficiency is simply a measure of whether or not you're wasting resources in the production of goods and services. And you could think probably pretty deeply about how you could characterize waste in production. And actually, economists have done that quite a bit. But what we end up with in most settings is just this notion of cost efficiency. So as long as the products and services in the economy are being produced at least cost, then there's not a waste in production. And allocative efficiency is a little bit more challenging. It deals more with this issue of, is there an efficient way to distribute goods and services, at least that we can measure the efficiency? And there, what economists have come to, and what's generally accepted, is that you want to make sure the goods and services go to the members of society, whoever they may be, that value the good and service the most. And you could think a lot about whether or not that's a good rule or a bad rule. This is probably the most controversial aspect of what our discipline does, because we simply measure the value of a product or a service to an individual based on their willingness to pay for that product or service. So in the world of economics, whoever's willing to pay the most for a good or service is the one that, and I'll put it in quotes because it's not really a should word. There's no moral content, but they should get the good in the sense it's more efficient if they do. And the argument for giving the good or allocating the good to the consumer that's willing to pay the most for it is really a pretty simple one. It's that if, let's say we're talking about a pair of tennis shoes, and I'm willing to pay more for the pair of tennis shoes than you are, then there's a potential way that we can both be better off. If you end up with the tennis shoes and they're only worth $5 to you, but they're worth $10 to me, then if they're only worth $5 to you, I could pay you $6, or maybe we split the difference and I pay you $7.50. You're better off because the shoes were only worth $5 to you. Now you have $7.50, right? And you gave up shoes that were worth $5. You benefited $2.50. I purchased the shoes from you for $7.50 and they're worth $10 to me. So I get $2.50. So the only time that can't happen, which what I just described was, the final good and the service was produced, but a trade amongst the members of society to decide who was actually going to get the good, which resulted in them both being better off. I'm better off because the shoes were worth $10 to me and I only paid $7.50 for them. You're better off because you had them. They were only worth $5 to you. And, you guys can think of a scenario where, two people go down to Walmart and one person gets there first and they get the shoes for $5, and, then somebody else walks in and says, hey, I really want those shoes and that was the last pair. If I give you $7.50, will you trade with me? And so it doesn't, that logic of mutually beneficial trade being left in the economy doesn't happen when the good is assigned to the person with the highest value. If I have the highest value for the shoes and they're $10, right, to me, and I have them, and they're only worth $5 to somebody else, then there's no way that we can both be better off if I trade those shoes away. The person who only values them at $5 can't offer me more than $10 for them, right? And I wouldn't want to sell them for less than $10. If I did, I would be doing it at a loss. So it's worth noting that when goods are allocated to consumers based on, here's a new term for you guys, well, maybe for some of you, willingness to pay. Okay. Then all potential gains from trade are exhausted. That means that, you can't do any more mutually beneficial trading. It's all done. So it's worth thinking about. And I'd like you guys to think about this point a little bit. Maybe it's easy, and I think there are two things that make the notion of efficiency, particularly allocative efficiency amongst consumers, controversial and difficult to appreciate. The boldness of the approach itself. That it is something that's daring, and the reason why economists are often criticized. But one of the objections goes like this. Willingness to pay does a poor job of accounting for ability to pay. And so the issue here is that, maybe the reason why I'm willing to pay $10 for the shoes is because I just have a higher income. Maybe you really need the shoes. So if our society allocates goods on the basis of price, which it does for about 70% of the resources, like I said, 30% go through the government, and that's its own sort of allocative process. And a lot of the transfers and the programs that are done through the government are actually speaking to this issue that, in the market, there might be consumers with a high willingness to pay because they have a high ability to pay because they have a high income. And so they're willing to pay more for the shoes, so they get them. And then there are some people out there who, and I'll just put it in quotes because, you and I probably, most people have a different idea of what need means. But there might be people out there, so I'll just couch it the way that, I've heard it from other people. There might be people out there that don't have an ability to pay, but they really need the shoes, but they can only pay $5 for them. So, that those people have to, at the end of the day, go without the shoes because they can't pay the higher price. Then, our measure of economic efficiency doesn't really account for that. And, like I said, I'm, one of these people. I'm an economist, so I just do what my discipline does, and I try to do it well. And those kinds of aspects of thinking about it, I can't, that depart from the standard way that we do things in economics. I can't really comment on the validity of the arguments, but I appreciate them. So, and apparently a lot of other people do too. And, if you look again at anti-poverty programs and other things like that, then there's obviously some people who are saying like, yeah, maybe, it's not the Air Jordans, but we want to make sure everybody has a pair of shoes. And a lot of government transfer programs and charities are directed at trying to account for this issue in the way that the market works, the way that our things are done in our economy. So if you allocate goods on the basis of price, which, like I said, we do. Let's see. There was one other thing that I was going to mention, and well, I guess this was the main point. So I'll stop there for a minute, and I'll ask you guys to help me think about this and get a couple of opinions. So willingness and ability to pay are obviously different concepts, and so who would like to participate? Do we have a volunteer? I thought I heard someone's keyboard go. Okay.
This is Derek. I'll volunteer.
Okay. It's Derek Tafoya? Or is
Yeah.
it? Okay. Okay, Derek. So I think you probably got the gist of the argument, and I don't know. Are you concerned, or do you have an issue with this when we're talking about tennis shoes, that some people won't be able to afford the tennis shoes, and so they won't get them?
Uh,
What do you think about that?
what do I think about it?
Yeah, what do you think?
Um, so from an economic perspective, I guess this is something that goes back to principles. I kind of try to think of it in the same context that, yeah, I empathize for it. I do. I think it's an unfortunate situation, but if I'm looking at it from an economic perspective, and if markets are working efficiently, then there's always going to be something that you can say is unfair to people. So do I feel bad for those people? Yes, I do.
But you wouldn't change the market.
I wouldn't change the market if the market is efficient. No.
Yeah. Okay. So that's party line, But now I think when it gets a little bit deeper, more controversial, is when we talk about things like
Healthcare.
housing or healthcare.
Right.
Um, but honestly, I don't want to press you too much on those things, because I think you gave a really nice answer, and I already talked about like, we do have housing programs that are run through the government, and we could talk about the adequacy of those things, but and healthcare programs now that are run for the government. For a long time, the government has been involved in the healthcare market for the elderly, for Medicare and Medicaid for low-income folks. So, but yeah, I don't know if you have another comment. I didn't want to cut you off, but
No, I'm good.
okay. So yeah, I mean, hopefully when you guys go through these things and think about what we're doing, you'll realize that, yeah, there are other people that have concerns, let's just say, about the way that we do things, because ultimately, by measuring the gains from trade and trying to ensure that they're exhausted in production and in the distribution of goods and services, there's some people that are left out. And one of the other things I want to mention really quickly is that there's another name for resource allocation mechanisms. So in equivalent, and I'll put 3 equal signs, name, a synonym, is rationing mechanisms. And I think the reason that it's useful to bear this in mind is it really kind of cuts to the bone on these issues of who gets what, because rationing entails this idea. I don't know if you guys have heard about rationing, but normally it's done in wartime. And if you read your history books, you probably read about rationing of rubber and metal during World War II and things like that. But when there's a direct rationing, then that means certain people get certain little portions and they can get no more, and that's normally controlled by government program. And so a lot of people don't think of the market as being a rationing mechanism, but the only thing that distinguishes it is the market rations on the basis of willingness to pay. And a lot of times people call this the price rationing mechanism. So I think the reason why the word rationing really helps sort of crystallize the meaning here is that at the end of the day, and I think there were a couple people in the last lecture when we were first talking about defining economics, they used the word scarcity, which is used a lot in introductory textbooks. And here you can see rationing means that not everybody is going to get what they want. Maybe some people aren't going to get any at all. And why is that? Well, it's because resources ultimately are scarce, and scarcity literally means that the wants exceed the ability to satisfy those wants. There's just not enough. So, and I think this was the other thing I was going to say, I think is difficult for people to appreciate. And this is really my personal observation, which is that we live, most of us have our whole lives live in abundance. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit. So has anybody here been to Tijuana?
Yeah.
Okay, who is that?
Derek.
Oh, Derek. I almost forgot to say. Anybody else besides Derek been to Tijuana?
Yeah.
Who is that?
Yeah.
Sonica.
Sonica's been to Tijuana. Anybody else?
Yes,
Who's that?
Mauricio.
Mauricio, you've been to Tijuana. When was the last time, since I haven't talked to you, except for we chatted a little bit, but so Mauricio, when was the last time you went to Tijuana?
I would say last year.
Last year. Okay. So how long did you drive from here down to Tijuana?
About an hour and a half to 2 hours.
To get to Tijuana.
Right.
Yeah. And did you drive your car across the border?
Yes.
How long did it take you to get back?
I think like 4 to 5 hours.
Waiting in
Or
line?
yeah, because the line was really long.
Yeah, my wife and I just went down this past weekend, and it took us, we didn't know the line was that long. So we sailed down there. We went across the border into Tijuana, and we got across in just a minute. We just like slowed down to 40, a couple speed bumps. The border patrol on the Mexican side just like waved us through. There was no big problem, and it was easy. But then on our way back, the line was 6 hours long. We had like 7 lanes of traffic. I don't know where you guys came back, but we went back across Garita Ote.
Yeah, that's where we usually come back through.
And I don't know, they had like 7 lanes of traffic, and they had like, I don't know, I didn't count because I was too tired, but it's like 8 or 10 or maybe 12 possible lanes you could go through. They only had 3 open. And they were checking every single car. So it was a grind, 6 hours. But I actually wanted to talk to you a little bit more about what did you see down in Tijuana? Because I think the reason why I wanted to contrast the abundance is that, I mean, maybe people have seen from movies and things like that, but did you notice the contrast? I thought downtown Tijuana was really nice, and I loved the statues. They had a statue of Lincoln and a couple other figures from the history of Mexico. Um, eh, but but if you were gonna, I don't know if you drove around Tijuana a lot, but I think, at least to me, their scarcity is more palpable. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's true.
What types of stuff did you see while you were down there?
I just see like people live really fast over there. It's just like they're always trying to like hustle, you know?
Yeah, so there are all the street vendors and things like that. And
Right.
did you so we took a wrong turn and we ended up on this really, really steep hill overlooking Tijuana, so we could see all of Tijuana. And then we also took a wrong turn going back to Garita Thai. So
That
we
always happens.
so but yeah, I mean, it seems like, there's some pretty harsh living conditions for a lot of the people down in Tijuana. And my wife's actually from Guadalajara area down in Jalisco, and we've been down there, and where her family lives is pretty nice. Um, so I was kind of surprised about um, what I saw in Tijuana. But yeah, I think at least for me, having seen or seeing things like that, I get the idea that, yeah, there's not really, big abundance, even though there's lots of construction going on. Obviously, there's not enough, building materials for all the people that would want to build their houses in certain ways and things like that. And so, um, yeah, I don't know. I'm telling my story, but I just wanted to see if you felt the same way.
No, yeah, I agree with you. There's just there isn't much. There's just really you could really see the difference from the one border to the other. That the poverty over there is really high, and what we think poverty over here is completely different to the poverty that's on the other side of the border.
Yeah, that's what I think. And in fact, I came back, and when, like I said, we had a really good time when we went down to visit her family in Jalisco, and things seemed great there. But when I didn't take any of my kids with me, when I got back, I have a daughter that turns 18 next month. And I wanted to take her to Tijuana so bad because I was like, no, you have to be able to appreciate the difference. Because, and I think that's hard for people. It's hard to understand what scarcity is when you live in abundance. Um, and even traveling around the country here, you can see differences in living standards in different places. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear to me that that for the average person living in Southern California, um, it's difficult to understand that there are lots of people out there that want lots of stuff, and for good reasons, and there's just not enough to go around. So people have to be, and that's what efficiency really is all about, is making sure that resources aren't wasted. But anyway, thanks for your comments. Okay, and I gotta check the time. Okay, so we're doing pretty good. Now I want to go back a little bit and talk about job number 1. So all of the controversial stuff is this idea of picking a quantitative measure of social well-being. And economists do that, and I'll actually put it right here. So efficiency is measured by net social benefit. And we say net social benefit, but it's also, you guys have heard this term, total surplus. Those are equivalent terms. I prefer net social benefit because net social benefit, and notice this isn't a triple equal sign, this is just 2 equals, or a regular equal sign. So this is an equation, is total social benefit minus total social cost. And I'll say also that total social cost is just the costs to society of producing the resources. And most of those costs are the costs that you guys are familiar with. Now, it's worth saying that, even though we use dollars and cents as I discussed before, really what we're talking about is opportunity cost. And it's really worth bearing that in mind when you're talking about, big numbers like billions of dollars or things like that, because it's hard to have a good mental idea of what $1 billion means if you don't think about, well, if you use the $1 billion for this thing, what can't you use the $1 billion for, right? So what's being given up? If you just think about it as paper money, then it's not clear that at least a lot of times people lose contact with the idea that there's stuff that's being sacrificed when you move those resources around to dedicate them to the project that you're spending on. But that being aside for a minute, it won't harm you and may help your intuition, as long as you're a little bit methodical and thinking about it, that costs are just like the costs of manufacturers, the cost of labor, the cost of electricity, the cost of materials, things like that. That's fine. But the real controversy part is when we talk about total social benefit. And the total social benefit is just the sum of the willingness to pay of consumers that, and I'll put get the good. Okay. And there's another way to say it that's a little bit more sophisticated. You could just say, and I'll put this as being equivalent, you could say the aggregate willingness to pay. So again, then we get back to this idea of willingness to pay and ability to pay. But our discipline has again put a stake in the ground and said, listen, this is what we can quantify. This is what we're going to do. We're gonna measure total social benefit as aggregate willingness to pay. Now, one of the things that is not clear at this point, and so we'll kind of stick a pin in it, and then we'll talk about it more a little bit later, is that aggregate willingness to pay doesn't mean that the person actually did pay, right? So, for example, we're talking about the shoe example, and so if my willingness to pay for the shoes, and it's important, and I'll actually start a new whiteboard here. So we say willingness to pay, but I'm missing a couple of adjectives that, if I'm going to be proper about it, I'll put a triple equal sign. What we actually mean is the marginal maximum willingness to pay. And, you know, this might seem completely unnecessary because it's obvious if you think about it. But if we give the example of the tennis shoes again, if I'm willing to pay $10 for the tennis shoes, well, what does that really mean? Well, the way that economists interpret it is that if at any price $10 or less, I would purchase the shoes. But if you offered them to me at $10 and a penny, I wouldn't. So that's why it's the maximum, because $10 is the absolute maximum that I would be willing to pay for those pair of tennis shoes. And the word marginal here, and let's see if it'll let me highlight it. Maybe not.
Professor,
Yeah,
I had a quick question.
sure.
So is willingness to pay basically just how much like value you put on that object that you're buying?
Well, yeah, but it's also, it's a dollar measure, right?
Okay.
Right. So because ultimately, like I explained in the last lecture, I don't know if you remember, we use dollars because it gets kind of tiresome to even when you're trying to work with, you know, lots of different markets and lots of different products, to keep talking about exchange rates of, you know, 2
Yeah.
tacos for 3 sodas. And if you use the price ratios, you can calculate that anyway. So, yeah, but literally willingness to pay is, you know, if I offered you the pair of tennis shoes, then, you know, and you said your willingness to pay was $15, then that would mean that you're willing to pay $15 and not a penny more. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just wondering if it was just the highest, like, I guess, dollar value that you'd put on something.
Yeah, it is the highest possible dollar value. But normally when we talk about value, that's
Mhm.
sort of like implicit, right? Because
Yeah.
when I say, you know, what's your value for the tennis shoes? And if you say, oh, you know, like they're worth $15 to me, what you're saying is they're not worth $15 and a penny, you know? And
Yeah.
then also at any price, that's why the willingness to pay language is a little bit confusing, because obviously if I'm willing at most to pay, by maximum is $10, at any price less than that, I'm willing to pay 10, but I'm also willing to pay 9, I'm willing to pay 8, I'm willing to pay 7, because I would buy them for a lower price too. So it's important to make sure that, like, when we use value and when we use willingness to pay, we implicitly know we're talking about the maximum we would value that good at, or the maximum we would pay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And the other thing that I would like to point out is this concept of marginal, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And so when you're talking about goods and services, you have what we'll call later diminishing marginal utility, right? Which means for your first pair of shoes, you're probably willing to pay a lot. But for your second pair of shoes of the same type, right, in the same condition, um, probably not as much. And for the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and the seventh pair, even less. So normally we have to be careful that when we're talking about, what's your willingness to pay for this pair of shoes, we understand that you might already have 10 pairs of these shoes in your closet. So marginal is an indicator that we're talking about the last unit or the particular unit that we're discussing, and not some previous unit. So as you might have figured out, the reason why people just use willingness to pay as a shorthand is that these two what I'll call pedantic considerations, right? So when you're being pedantic, you're being, super academic about it, very specific. Well, most people would never misunderstand if you're talking about what's your willingness to pay for this pair of shoes I have right here. They would never mistakenly think, oh, well, that was, not, if I took all your other shoes away and then offered you this pair, it wouldn't be anything weird like that. So normally willingness to pay communicates the idea, but when we start to talk about things mathematically, it's worth bearing in mind that we're talking about maximum marginal willingness to pay and using willingness to pay for shorthand, because instead of dealing with the reality of a particular pair of shoes, we're just dealing with numbers, and it's more easy to get confused. So, okay. So maximum marginal willingness to pay. Now I want to go back a minute, and I want to talk about again this first issue. I said, every economist, you guys, right, you girls, all of you, you have two jobs, and the first one is to describe the equilibrium. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. Job number one. Well, actually, I'll put number one, right? Describe the equilibrium. And I think it's easy to understand this when you contrast two things that you guys probably know at least a little bit about, which is the competitive equilibrium versus monopoly equilibrium, right? Competitive equilibrium is generally something that happens when you've got lots of buyers and sellers. So you've got lots of sellers in particular selling a good, competing with each other, tends to drive prices down. Then if you have one seller that's a monopolist over the entire market, then prices tend to be higher, other things being equal. So you end up with a different price and different quantities of the good being exchanged. In particular, again, under competition, you tend to have more sellers, lower price, more units of the good exchanged between sellers and buyers. In the case of monopoly, the monopolist tends to have a higher price and provide less units to the market. So fewer trades between the monopolist and the buyers, right? So there's not as much of the good around. Totally different equilibria. Now, the thing that I think needs to be said is that this is purely objective, right? And you guys might have heard in another textbook about concepts that are positive and normative. Okay, so positive, a positive concept is one that is measurable and without any value judgments. So what I'm getting at here is that when we think about economics as a science, right, that this is the place where we don't have to worry about any of the issues that we talked about with respect to measuring social welfare. And I'll come back to that in just a second. But the point is that what happens in the competitive equilibrium, what price is going to be established on the basis of competition, and how many units are going to be traded, those are just purely objective and quantifiable. There's no no issue there. I mean, and in fact, I didn't and hadn't intended on spending much, if any, time about talking about the difference between micro and macroeconomics. So I'll just do a little bit of that here. So microeconomics, as you may already know, deals with individual, what we call firm, I mean business firm or business, right? And individual businesses' decisions with respect to how to produce its product and what price to charge for its product. So individual business behavior and individual consumer behavior, how you and I decide how to allocate our time between working and leisure activities, what goods we decide to buy, you know, how much of our income we save, but individual decisions. And then also we deal with individual markets. So the market for shoes, or the market for tomatoes, or the market for labor. Those are all microeconomic concerns. And when we're talking about macroeconomics, macroeconomics has to do with how all of the markets function together and interact. Now, we do talk about some market interactions in microeconomics. So, for example, if you're talking about, you know, the market for tennis shoes you use for playing tennis, and the market for running shoes, and you know, a lot of times people will buy like cross training shoes, right? And a lot of times those shoes are good substitutes for one another. I know that sometimes I'll buy shoes that are labeled as cross trainers, and sometimes I'll buy running shoes, and I still do all the same stuff in both of them. But if you do look at them a little bit more closely, you'll see there are a little bit differences in the way the treads are and the structure of the shoe. One is designed more for literally running, you know, jogging around, and another one is designed for doing some different types of activities, maybe a little bit more like hiking and things like that, based on the way the tread is. But they're close enough substitutes, at least for me, and I think for lots of other consumers, that we probably switch back and forth between the categories a lot based on price and other things that we like, you know, the color of the shoe or its shape or something. So obviously, you know, the markets are connected, and you could even say, like, you know, the markets for four-door sedans, for automobiles, and the markets for SUVs are connected. Sometimes people will switch back and forth and substitute those for one another based on price and other things. So you can get the price of goods in one market influencing the price for goods in another market, and that can still be microeconomics, a couple markets connected. But when you're talking about, you know, the whole country and, you know, prices for goods and services in general and inflation generally and things like that, those are macroeconomic concepts. But one of the things you guys probably haven't learned in macroeconomics yet, because a lot of times maybe they wouldn't even discuss this depending upon the professor you had until you get to graduate school. But you know, if you end up getting a master's degree in economics or something like that. But there's been more and more evidence these days that the macro economy with respect to economic growth, which is the growth in real output over time, is and I'll just use this word generally, it's, you know, phenomenological. Yeah. So it's like the growth rate of a bacteria. So we have, I went to this really interesting talk at UCLA many years ago, and they had an expert there that had GDP all the way going back to like 1790 and clear up through the Great Recession in 2008. And what you could see was that regardless of the Great Recession, regardless of the Great Depression, regardless of other periods where there was widespread you know, decline in the overall economy, that there was this 3% growth rate trend in the output of our economy going all the way back to 1790. So, you know, it's just like a phenomenon. It, you know, not economists don't really understand why. You like to think, well, it's because of our institutions, because of our markets, because we did this and because we did that, and these technologies and things like that were discovered. But no, it seems like you know, on trend growth, and what's amazing is that when you see episodes like the Great Recession and the Great Depression, what they end up being just really small deviations from that 3% trend. You know, when you look at it over the course of a couple hundred years, it's just amazing. So the point that I was getting to was that in that sense, economic growth is a purely objective or purely positive, scientifically measurable condition. It doesn't matter what your value judgments are, your political beliefs, or anything like that. It's just, it's there, like, you know, the stars are there. And the equilibria is the same way when we're talking about, you know, competitive equilibrium or monopoly equilibrium, or we're talking about different forms of oligopoly equilibrium. These are supposed to be just descriptions of what will emerge in the market. And, you know, like it is what it is. You just, there it is. And you know, it doesn't, and that's what our job is to characterize that equilibrium, our first job. And then we've already talked about the second job, and I only have one other comment that I can think of that is worth adding right now, because we're going to talk more about how to do this stuff as the course progresses. But so measuring efficiency, that there's a lot of welfare measurement that is positive as opposed to normative with value judgments and things like that. So again, for contrast's sake, right, there's no value judgment about economic growth. It just exists at 3%, whether you like it or you don't. It doesn't matter. We could talk about we should have this or we should have that, but background economic growth in the United States has been 3%, and it doesn't seem like it changes from that. And the competitive equilibrium is what it is. You have these many firms and these many consumers, this price emerges, it's that quantity. There's no value judgment about it. It just, that's what happens, right? It's not that you can't change it, because you could have a different sort of market structure. You can regulate things, but if the market is competitive, that's what it is. Now, so with respect to measuring efficiency, given that we've decided what measure we want to use for efficiency, the measurement, again, is what it is. But where a little bit of, and maybe more than a little bit, depending upon your perspective, but where the normative, and so the term normative implies a value judgment. And so where the normative aspects creep into economic efficiency is that a lot of times economists and policymakers get together and they try to make a market more competitive or less competitive, and they try to work out policies to improve the efficiency of the market. Now, the question really then at that point is efficiency a good thing for policymakers to pursue or not? I mean, I can talk about a mechanical engine as not being fuel efficient, but maybe that's the way I like my engine. Maybe I want a really big engine because I like the way it sounds when I am at a stoplight and I rev it, even though I'm only getting 8 miles to the gallon. That's an issue of value judgment, of preferences, what I like, what I don't. But as long as we're not using efficiency to give policy advice, and like I said, oftentimes efficiency guides policy advice, but as economists, we don't have to do that. And there are lots of economists that just characterize the welfare consequences and say it's the job of policymakers to decide what they want to do. And if they care about efficiency, good. If they don't, they don't. But this is what the efficiency consequences are. So we can objectively, once we've picked our measurement of efficiency, we can measure it, and we can do it precisely and carefully and scientifically, right? Which means improve the way that we measure it over time if we figure out that there are certain things that are difficult to measure, which there are. But it's only when you connect up the concept of efficiency with the idea that it's a goal to be pursued that you're actually making a value judgment. And your value judgment is that efficiency is good and we should pursue efficiency. So hopefully you guys understand the difference in the language there, is because when you're talking about something being good or bad or should, that's when you're talking from a values-based perspective. And anyway, it's worth, as you're starting out, even though we're going to learn all these tools, to know that in the background, when efficiency is used as a way to guide policy, then it is it's a value judgment, and you know, as soon as you do that, you're treading into territory of philosophers and politicians. So you know, you should be warned that not everybody will agree with you. That's okay, as long as you know what you're doing. Okay, so let's see. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna talk just for another second about the first fundamental welfare theorem. And remember, we said competitive markets are efficient. Okay, so we have to understand what we really mean by competition. So exactly. And what you guys have probably heard up until this point in time is, you know, there's some lies that are useful, right? I mean, if anybody's ever seen a hyena before, and you're trying to describe a hyena to them, you would say a hyena looks like a wolf. But is there anybody here who knows what a hyena is? It's not. You guys probably can Google it, but anybody want to tell me? It's not a canine. And it's not a cat. Okay. How about Arsenio? Are you there?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So what is a hyena? Did you Google it? Yeah.
Said like a feline form
Oh, you roboted out on me. Okay, maybe you should type it in the chat, because you're.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
It said like a feline form carnivore or something like that.
Yeah, but I don't.
Carnivore or something, I don't know.
Yeah, so okay. Does anybody else want to chime in? Because last time I typed it into Google, and I'll.
It says it's a dog-like African mammal.
Okay, that's fine. But did it tell you what it's related to? Like it's part of like a family.
It says that they're the family Hyanide, or something like
Okay.
that. And then like their fifth smallest biological family in the carnivora and smallest in the class of Mammalia.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'll go back with what I was going to say anyway, and you guys can look it up a little bit more carefully if you want to later. But so basically, they're like giant raccoons. That's what I looked up last time. So but they do kind of look like dogs, right? And if you've never seen one, then you would say, well, you know, how do you describe it? It kind of looks like a dog. I mean, it even says in some of the stuff that you guys were talking, like, you know, it looks like a big dog or whatever. It does, but they're not. You know, their bone structure and everything like that it's different. And from my understanding, I'm not a biologist, but they're more closely related to a raccoon than they are to a dog. So when you guys are first having competitive equilibrium described to you, a lot of times we use this kind of shorthand and say, well, it's lots of buyers and sellers. But now that we're out of time, I'll leave you guys with a cliffhanger, which is that's not exactly what it means for us to be in competition. And so, or in a competitive market equilibrium. So I will stop there and we'll pick up this next time. Okay. And are you guys still with me? Okay. All right.
Yes.
So I will see you guys on Thursday. And